So hi everyone. We're going to continue talking. So to give some context, if you just joined us, I was talking to some friends who were saying basically, you know, Steve Jobs, people like this, it looks like you need to be a narcissist to be an exceptional leader. And I just wanted to challenge that point today and sort of bat it around. So David, where do you stand? Do you need to be a narcissist to be a good leader? What's your views?
No.
Okay.
Sure. No. But I think we often, so some of the, we need to be very careful about the sort of words we use when we talk about narcissists and some of these things. So a genuine narcissist can look very attractive from the outside, and a lot of people, again, I wouldn't want to say if somebody is or isn't, you know, but some of the traits, if you look at some of the kind of films about Steve Jobs or some of the, you know, the books you read, he shows some narcissistic traits. You know, and there's that great film with Michael Fassbender. He doesn't give praise to many other people. He very much about him, very much about his agenda and what he's trying to drive. In businesses, some of those traits can be very, very helpful in terms of sort of force of personality of driving something to an outcome. But starting a business or building a business, it takes serious courage, serious willpower to, you know, get past certain blocks to make it happen. And the lines on that can become quite blurred between someone who's got a forceful personality who, you know, is very clear what they want, a perfectionist, very demanding on what they want, and a genuine narcissist. And so that's where kind of, I think it's probably more talking about narcissistic behavior as opposed to a narcissist. In reading, you know, in just doing a bit of reading and looking around before this, I'd previously worked with someone who is the dictionary definition of a narcissist. Every single trait for a narcissist, they did. You know, from making outrageous claims that are very hard to quantify, very hard to back up, and very hard to therefore question. If you question the littlest thing, they kind of scream and shout at you. So therefore, you're never going to question anything else. One of the things to look at with a narcissist would be: is it a genuine abusive relationship? Some people feel they're in an abusive relationship because their boss screams and shouts at them. That doesn't mean they're a narcissist. It might just mean they like screaming and shouting. But as in, is it emotionally manipulative? Does it feed on some of your insecurities to keep you around, and they play on that? And I think those kind of people tend to get, they tend to have their sort of comeuppance at some point, but it can be very, very, very emotionally damaging working for them or being around them.
Are they consciously aware of what they're doing?
I think this probably is something that Tom said earlier, and again, you might want to, Tom, I'll leave you to pick on this and expand on it properly, but I think for the large part of them, it's almost they slightly live in their own fantasy world where they genuinely believe they're the most important person. The narcissist I work for, or someone who showed a lot of narcissistic traits, you know, I don't know if he was officially, you know, categorized as that. Yeah, he would say things like, "Oh, when you're setting up this meeting, can you just make sure that they know how lucky they are to be in the room with me?" You're like, "Sorry, what?" Like, is a genuine statement of it'll, you know, that's really important. Is it? So what? And you kind of have to catch yourself on this and things. You're going home and you're like, "What?" That doesn't. And that's kind of one of those narcissistic things. So I don't necessarily know that they're kind of consciously aware of it. It's that they're almost sort of so hyperly self-focused that they can't see the wood for the trees, and they can't see therefore how their behavior would be inappropriate. So, you know, it's on the cold light day of it, you go, wow, this person is so cold and calculating in terms of how they manipulate and change people. But I don't think they're kind of sitting at home with a notepad and pen working out how to do it. I think they just, it's almost a hardwired in as to how they operate.
Yeah, and I think if you're on the receiving end of it, there's a tendency to go home and sort of pick out the bits you admire them for, you know, like the sort of, yeah, the stubbornness or the blinkered approach. Or sometimes if you're an empathetic person, you're just in awe of the fact, like, how can you just be like that? You know, like there are times in life you wish you could just be that sort of, it's not cold, I don't know what it is, but it's just so blind to what's sort of going on. I mean, Tom, you had a good example of people you've come into contact with like that. And
yeah, I mean, I think when you truly, I think the first thing is, Nick, to sort of try and get to grips with what we're talking about. I think the elements of selfishness, a sense of entitlement, a lack of empathy, and a need for admiration. And if you just think about that, those are four rather unappealing traits. It's all about them. So I think what this means in reality, and I have actually met technically a narcissist who was actually almost disabled to the point of, and everything was done on their terms. So I think it's well beyond the Steve Jobs thing where someone's passionate about but someone has to make a decision, someone has to drive something through. But this is actually quite different. I think this is, but nonetheless, I think it's worthwhile just talking about some of those elements. And I think you talked about narcissism in terms of success. I think these are the antithesis of success, because what this will actually do is switch people off quite dramatically, because as David just said, what you actually get is complete silence, and that's deadly, particularly at the moment from a well-being perspective in terms of feeling part of the team, inclusiveness, all those sorts of things. I think the other thing is also pride as well. I think I can't imagine that it's not associated with pride, and the difficulty with pride is inability to admit mistakes. And again, that's a very difficult place to be. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So, and the other thing I think, well, the other thing is in terms of success, that the characteristics of success of leaders is intelligence. Okay, so the really successful leaders are more intelligent than other people. The second thing is also conscientiousness. So the number of hours they do per week, they do 80 hours per week. And it's not, and also they're not agreeable. Okay, and then there's something about, and I think you can be empathetic, in other words, understand people's interests without being agreeable, because as you well know, Nick, if your factory burns down, and you have to get a new factory or there's some disaster, then you have to immediately become unreasonable versus what the norm to deliver something. But that doesn't mean that you can't stop being empathetic to the people, because you can still drive it forwards and make decisions. So there is a time, I think, to become more decisive and less agreeable, but that doesn't mean you're necessarily narcissistic. And I think when I think back to some of the the behaviors around this selfishness, sense of entitlement, which is a sort of characteristic of the SME owner that owns all the shares, and you're working for me, this is my business, when in fact it's not. They also are working for that company because it's a limited entity. When you find yourself in those situations, I think you do find the Steve Jobs type characteristics, but not so much the narcissistic type characteristics. But I think the overwhelming, more common situation is pride, and that manifests itself in terms of. I remember a couple of things. A while ago, there's a very narcissistic. I mean, this guy was a narcissistic boss. In fact, my first really senior appointment when I was about 28, this guy was very narcissistic, and he sent a container of product to the wrong port in the States. That is a big issue. That means you've got a delay of a month to get the product to the right, and so you then have to air freight very heavy components across the pond. And yet he could not admit, and I actually got one of my junior members of my team to tell him this, just to try and smooth the waters, and it was just a ridiculous situation. So I think I think it's important to understand not necessarily the generalizations, but the specifics elements, and actually that this characteristic is absolutely not the characteristic of success. And also empathy doesn't mean you're soft either. You can still be absolutely resolute and quite unreasonable.
Yeah, and just to, I'm sort of going to take the side of the narcissist here a little bit. I mean, trying to pull a positive out of them is that every narcissistic person I've worked closely with, they're very consistent, right? What I find people hate working for them. They're not very quick to leave them, right? And that's usually because they associate with the fact they're consistent. You sort of know where you stand with these people because it's so outlandish, some of the behavior. And we should all, in principle, walk away from it, but we don't. Usually because we like the rest of the people who are around us. And they actually sometimes create a common bond between people because everyone's like, isn't he? That guy's a weapon. And it brings people closer together. So actually, you start forming better relationships with your team. And I've just seen a lot of that, and it's and that consistency piece is is interesting. I don't know what you think, David, if you've seen that as well, or if that's just my personal experience, but it's I've seen it bring people together weirdly.
Yeah, and they are, as you say, consistently, they're actually very easy to deal with when you know the rules of the game. Very easy to deal with, because you know it's all about them. They need to be admired. The admiration, the compliments, is their way or the highway, the whole thing. They're actually very easy to work with when you know the rules, because they're consistent. That it's always about that. It's not one day it's about me, one day it's about you, one day it's just always about them. I think the other reason why people are long to leave people like that is because they associate their success or their perceived success with that person. So if someone is genuinely narcissistic, there will be an element of emotional abuse. So they'll have well, aren't you lucky to be working with me where we get these results? Not everyone in the market can do that. And it kind of sows these seeds of doubt constantly, that without them, you won't be the person that other people, they'll cite other people who've left, who've really struggled, and all those kind of things. Very similar to, a sort of romantic abusive relationship with a narcissist. You have some of those traits where it could be quite hard to leave. But as you say, they have a veneer of success, and they can, humanly speaking, in terms of how we rate success in the West, they often get success because they're very clear on what they want and how they're going to get it, and they manipulate people to do it, all of which can be quite attractive, initially anyway.
Yeah. And it's interesting. So one of the things I've dealt with now, we all deal with psychology profiles of people, right? We go into businesses and have our own IP for assessing what people do and how they react, and writing reports on people around it, which is eye-opening. But I definitely think if there's anyone in a business where they have that, they're coming up through management and their boss is a bit of a nightmare and they could try and champion anything, going through that process for those kind of evaluations where everyone reads up on themselves and learns how they communicate, can be really eye-opening, because a few of these people, it's that you hand them that document and they just look stunned, and then you also watch them slowly fight it, how they're not any of the stuff the report says, even though the other 99% of the office who's done the same process are going, that's me, oh my goodness, how does this know, how does this 10,000 questions work out who I am? And they're the one going, no, I'm not aggressive, I care about people. And I definitely think that's something you can try and encourage, be at an HR level. Also, if you haven't got a narcissistic boss, just having that insight and how to communicate with all of your teams, especially if you're going across different business functions, is great. Knowing how to talk with the operations piece to the sales guys. I mean, these are like men are from Venus, whatever from Mars. Like, there is totally different mindsets between these two groups of very detailed people, very high emotionally driven, passionate people. If you can't, the people who successfully navigate businesses are one who can learn to talk between the two. So I'd highly recommend that. But if you do have a terrible boss like that, trying to, sell it as like an opportunity to understand and work better together and give something back to your team, actually might be helping them, like upwardly managing them in that situation might be good. And I'm sure, Tom, you, I mean, large part of what you do, right? Like actually sort of helping people actually shine a real light on the truth of a business.
Yeah, I'm not. I think there's a difference in grit. So I can fly in the face of the wind, Nick, but I'm aware. I spend a lot of my time developing tools to increase my empathy. So I think, and actually, I have no regard for awards whatsoever. I hate winning awards, absolutely. But actually, if you look on LinkedIn and stuff, people actually do really get quite excited. I've got, so I think there's traits of, and the reason why I don't like winning awards is because it creates exactly the wrong behaviors in me, because it makes me become complacent, and I've seen it wreck businesses as well, or wreck the flexibility of businesses. But I think it's important to recognize that everybody, even the narcissists, are actually doing the best they can. It's just a way of working that they've realized. But it shouldn't be underestimated in terms of how difficult that is to resolve, because you're effectively taking away their tools to operate. And I tend to be the sort of person who will challenge those people. I think if people are unable to make change, then I think that is the one reason that I consistently fire people. And I think there is a sort of weird dependence. These people do create a sort of whirlwind around them that, and a sort of sense of meaning despite them, particularly if they're the CEO. And I can remember, the PA coming to me once in various businesses saying that you're the only person that stands up to this person. And actually you need to know, so the odd thing is actually when you meet these people, you actually need to match them on their terms to develop rapport. So they might use quite aggressive terms, and actually to develop rapport with them, you need to put your head in the lion's mouth by actually using the same terms. And that actually wipes them out. Because people get that wrong. There's anything, oh, this person's like me, thank goodness for that. And actually then you've got them in quite a good place, which is the antithesis. But you thought you'd sort of start World War III, and you don't. I think the other thing was charisma as well. This is a misunderstood trait. A lot of these people are charismatic. The problem with charisma is it detracts from the business. So I think, but it's seen as being a trait, but actually it takes people to the attention away from the business to the person, pleasing the person. So I think pleasing the individual can be very difficult in these situations. I think when it does work, when I think back where narcissistic people do sort of operate quite well, is when there's a heavily process-driven environment. So, a lot of the factory environments I've worked in, even though they're very challenging by people to think, where there's a really real process, to go from A to Z, very well, it's not autocratic, because I think you can still get the people side of it right, but you can get away with it, and it creates a sort of sense of fear, in terms of, but the other thing it creates is a limitless sense of surprises. So if you have a boss who is like that, people will sabotage things. So, and I've come across this lots of times where you find, because people become alienated and fed up, they will just sod you. And I've seen sabotage take place. So yeah, I think it's worth just acknowledging, some of these traits in ourselves. So if we find ourselves, yearning for awards or recognition, beware. What's the implications of that? Because that is an element of narcissism that we're, and I think a lack of empathy. I think you need to learn empathy. I think you need to understand what it feels like and what it's, because I certainly didn't. I had to learn that myself in my career. I think the natural modus operandus is selfishness, to look after ourselves. But in fact, you learn the more difficult circumstances you work in. Actually, that doesn't work. So, and I think at the moment when things are getting more difficult, these people are being left high and dry, and they will absolutely cause businesses to collapse. So it shouldn't be underestimated what a threat these traits are.
Or they're going to hunker down into the team that just follows exactly what they say, right? And operates and doesn't challenge them. They're going to go two ways, aren't they? They're going to either lose people or they're going to just get rid of them. So they've actually just got their little, palace of control they want. I mean, so David, one thing I was thinking while Tom was speaking there is I think, from my personal experience, I think I'm a better leader for working under someone who can be described as what we're describing, right? As I would have had to change I thought I would have changed my approach. And I've done, series of those, I'm regularly sort of testing myself on the same stuff we ask clients to do. And over a period of years, I saw very different changes, which must have been impacted by the fact I'm trying to take a message from someone who's maybe not really thinking the interest of the team, and then I'm trying to morph it into something that is actually productive and can be, that other sort of humans can understand, and go from there.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that there are certainly benefits from working with people like that for a period of time. I think it's just the sort of, it's amazing how quickly the most crazy things become normal when you start saying them to your friends. When you go, so someone I worked with, if he messaged me saying, call me 24 hours a day, any time of the day, and I didn't call back within a minute, he'd shout at me.
Right.
And to the point where, you know, I said, look, tomorrow evening, I'm seeing a friend, haven't seen them for a year. I'm going to the cinema. Like, I won't be contactable. And he sent me a message walking in. I said the times, everything. He sent me a message walking in going, can you call me right now? And so I messaged him, I'm really sorry. I've got, you know, 2 minutes before the film starts. I'm in the cinema. I can't do it. No reply. So you're then thinking, oh, did that go down badly? Like, what was the thing? Yeah. Then the next afternoon, nothing, you don't hear anything for, you know, almost 24 hours. Then the next afternoon, you get absolutely pillared for it. And so again, that's the sort of the again, you know, I'm kind of, you know, I've had a very negative experience working something like that. You go to the kind of very end. That's clearly not healthy. Mentally, it's not healthy to work for someone like that. That you could get a message at 2 a.m. So you always have to have your phone on loud. You always have to, the whole thing. That's not healthy. That's not right. And I think, like with anything, you've got to look at what are the good things about this and what are the unhealthy things about this. Narcissist or not, every leader will have really good things where you can go, I really like the way they did that. I really like the way they made people feel special on their birthday, or I really liked how they were so clear on reporting systems, or the importance of doing like the smallest detail, or whatever it is. And I think as we cultivate our own leadership style, you've got to kind of be around some of these people to learn the good bits. And there are good bits in everything, but also to be very clear on the bits that you don't want to be, or the bits that have a negative effect. And that's where it's really important to work for a kind of breadth of leader and different people, so you can pick out some of those best bits and learn from each of them as you grow and as you develop your own style.
Yeah, because I was always concerned with social media, and if you're a startup, right, and you're the leader of that startup, your visual presence now to be seen and sort of stand out is huge, right? Like, it's, you know, I know everyone has marketing teams and social media teams to do it, but predominantly from the founders I've been really impressed with, they are front and center of, like, you know, look at me, right? And I think there are certain traits actually, but when you go and speak to those people, that's something they don't love it, right? That is a strategy to win the business, rather than like a desperate desire to be seen. With I mean, there's a few who just love it, right? Who you just can't go on Twitter without seeing their face pop up, sort of thing. But are there what traits, if you were to take a narcissist, what are the traits you could take where you'd want to sort of encourage into a leader coming up? What are the bits you say, look, we can crank these bits up? Which would you take from there, sort of, Tom?
Well, I think, Nick, it's about diversity. So we are all different. I think the thing that struck me is there's two sides of this. One is if you are joining an organization, right, you've been recruited into an organization, this is very often just justified and accepted. They're described as the culture, as if the culture's okay. Okay. So I think in a lot of situations, the culture isn't okay, and actually some of these things need to be challenged. And then the question is, how long are you willing to put up with something that's not okay? And a lot of people will fit into something that isn't okay, and you'll adopt the behaviours you talked about, Nick, in terms of some of the positive bits, rather than actually addressing some of the more difficult bits or getting to know these people. So I think it's vital that we find a way of communicating, accepting that we're all different, and getting the job done, and acknowledging that there is actually a place in most instances for people of all different types and all different strengths. But it's also about us having a strong enough relationship to hold each other to account, because I think if we find ourselves in a situation where you can't say this, you can't say that, that doesn't just switch that bit of Tom off or Nick off, it switches you all off. It actually just it undermines your integrity, and that's a very dangerous place to be. So whilst I'm, very, very clear about what I will do and what I won't do, and that's, I think, in this environment, absolutely critical. There's also a sort of grey area in terms of acknowledging people for who they are. But I think the acid test and all of that is that there are some people who actually have had a pretty rough paper round, who are unable to take new action, and that is a very difficult situation. So what you described before in terms of fitting in behind these people, that could be the Titanic just on the verge of hitting the iceberg. Has anybody seen the iceberg? Are you, what's your role in that organization, etc.? And actually, is the relationship strong enough to tell the boss that actually the iceberg is there? And the classic of that was the Olympics. Nick, whatever his name was, that led G4S, who's probably one of the least approachable people on this planet, wasn't told that they were short of 10,000 security guards. No one told them, and actually that was the cause. Because so the reality of this is, in terms of unpleasant surprises, is dramatic. So don't underestimate, and that's what I that's the sort of thing I pick up when I sort of engagements from time to time. Not necessarily that dramatic, but at different levels, and so it's a real cost to this.
I totally agree. The person who's sort of just putting up with it and adapting, that's just a band-aid, right? Yeah. And there's that business is not moving forward. No. It's just expending a huge amount of energy to stay still.
Yeah, exactly.
And everyone will, I think, I'm not sure the CEO will feel in that scenario happy because this person's sort of complying into their world, right? But that person will one day figure out the fact that, the CEO should probably fire them because actually they're spending all their time trying to do something else to keep things together, knowing what's actually going on the floor, let's say. And it's going to end, it always ends badly. I think there's a period of time where you've learned something, you've adapted, your skill sets become better because of it.
Yeah, and the reason for that, Nick, is I think that the actions and the challenge get misaligned. Okay, so you do eventually hit the iceberg.
Yeah, oh, definitely. There's never been, I'm sure, a few, unless you're paid a huge amount of money and that's all you care about, and you can put up with that kind of crap all day. Everyone will break in that role. So what's interesting that comes up, so Uber, all the original Uber guys, now it's become very professional, right? Uber now, and you will hear them hark back to how it's killed the culture. And now the culture was it got reported was very boys club kind of thing, but they all loved it. And it just made me think, like, how much should they just, were they just lying to people about what their culture was, or should they just owned it, right? Like, you go and see a business like, I know it's a media business like Barstool Sports, right? With Dave Portnoy chirping what he does. That looks like a frat house, but they very much acknowledge it is a frat house, and that's what it is. And they attract certain people, and that goes there. It just seems to me that when you're building a company and you have that maybe a more aggressive culture to start with, you do have to plot a path of, like, this is how we are going to professionalize. Like, if you can acknowledge the fact, like, it's a bit wild right now, but a path of progression, because that's what it felt like with the Uber story, where it was just a shock that all of a sudden we have to behave, and the change is so rapid. It seems to have a negative impact on people, and they've fired a load of people, and they've lost a load of people because of culture. And that sort of messaging, I guess, is would you say, is that key, David, for that, if you're trying to go on that cultural change piece?
I think the interesting one in that situation, and I haven't worked with it or anyone who was around it, but it sounds like the change in culture was forced on them as opposed to a conscious decision of, guys, we need to have a think about this. And that also kind of, it's the sort of boiled frog scenario. You put a frog in boiling water, it jumps out. So when that culture was released to the world, everyone was like, sorry, what's happening? But if you're in it, you're probably not seeing it. You wouldn't see it how everyone else would see it. You're just like, well, that's not, they just picked up on one thing that happened at one party, or one, that's not what it's always like for everybody. But generally the culture is pretty cool. And therefore the sort of pendulum then swings right back the other way to do that. And I think because a lot of the time, the culture of a company is evolving around people, not sort of consciously planning it and looking at what they do want it to be. It's kind of just falls into habits. And if you have at the core of those things that cookie cutter just gets cut across the business as it grows, because it becomes part of the sort of cultural DNA. And that's where it becomes a real problem, because everyone's like, well, hang on, how did we get to this? And that's where people change kind of who they are to fit into an organization that just isn't actually that healthy.
Yeah, I think the way I capture this, Nick, is I develop a capability development plan which is aligned to the challenge. So what is the way of working that's going to deliver whatever we've got to do in 6 to 12 months time? How do we need to operate? Where are we now? How are we delivering stuff? How does the team need to develop, etc., to try and address these issues? And also, when you're addressing these issues, actually have a healthy discussion to make sure that people do feel comfortable to say what they feel, and manage expectations along that way. And I think that's something that, and I'd sort of draw a sort of a line like this with specific actions, establishing team reviews or whatever, in terms of getting to wherever we're going to get to. And that sort of, in its own imperfect way, tends to, and I think that's lacking a lot of organizations. Recruitment's part of that, by the way. Training captures a very small amount of it. It's much more to do with the way we speak to each other and the way we work together, and are we on Zoom, are we together, that sort of thing. That's what really matters.
Yeah. And David, if there's, I was going to say one bit of advice for if you think you're a narcissistic CEO, but the likelihood is you're probably not going to reach out for too much advice if you are that sort of person, right? So let's go for the people working underneath them. What advice could you give to someone who is trapped under someone like this?
The key word in that sentence there, probably with Nick, was trapped. You're never trapped, in terms of, it feels like that. So if you suddenly begin to feel that you are working for a narcissist, it's not healthy, it's not, your mental health is suffering, all those types of things, it can feel very scary because of the emotional manipulation and years or months or whatever it's been of kind of putting you into a certain mental state. But the best thing you can do is get out and constantly check kind of your, is this healthy? Is this where I really want to be? Is this good for me? One acid test is to see what has it done to the relationships around you. Has it alienated you from good friends, from family, things like that? That's certainly what one narcissist I work with did. And it can feel pretty scary to kind of leave, but it is 100% probably the best thing to do if it is in a really, really unhealthy place. So get people who can kind of support you through that. It's not you, it's them. It'll feel like it's your problem. And all the emotional manipulation will go along with it, of everything from, if you say you're going to leave and, oh no, it'll be different, it'll change, I'll take into your needs more. If someone's genuine narcissist, they're never going to do that. It's never going to happen. So just take the bold step and do it, and it will be 100% better at the other side, guaranteed. And it'll just take a little bit of time to get there.
I mean, it's good because there's no way longer term, if you see it in certain firms where there's someone's job in the business is just almost like a translator for the founder, right? Yeah. And you're just going to ruin your relationships with the people below you. Well, two things can happen. You're either going to end up buying that person out of the business because the whole team respect you and no one likes the business. You're like, right, the only way this business is going to survive is getting you out. Moving them, nicely prodding them and saying, maybe you should be chairman, just take some time out, relax, I'll run this, and they probably make quite good chairman, actually, those type of people. Or you're just going to burn relationships where people are going to sort of start disrespecting you for the fact you're not standing up to the business, and it's going to be nasty. So it sounds, I think leaving it all points to some kind of end point or Titanic iceberg point. The key thing is just making sure, it sounds like from this conversation, that there's probably some learns on the journey to get there. Just don't let it get to a point where you start sort of waking up, regretting wanting to come into work.
I think just one last thought on this, Nick. I think there are 3 checkpoints I use, because I quite often, if I fight in terms of whether or not I work for an organization or not, first of all, Does the incumbent want to do anything new, right? Secondly, what does the outcome look like? And thirdly, will they give you the space to do it? If they don't tick those boxes, then I think there's very little chance of me or anybody else being able to. And when you ask the question around the outcome, they'll tell you your values, and this whole thing sort of gets laid bare. And I think what tends to answer those questions in terms of it's my way or the highway, it's as is. It's always as is. More of the same. And I think that they are situations where I'll tend to actually typically walk away from the situation if that is the case. Very difficult to realign that.
Yeah, I think it's good. I really enjoyed that, guys. I think, again, going on a weird and wonderful topic there, which is good fun. Well, I think there were some gems in there that people sort of take away from it. And again, for everyone at home, if there is any elements of that conversation where you want some more details, reach out and we can put that into play for you and show you some of the techniques, but also some of the products available to sort of help you work through that with yourself and your teams as well, which I think is very useful right now, especially right now when we've all been thrown back into lockdown, and understanding what people really are like in those environments is pretty key. But otherwise, thank you, Tom and David. That was great, and thank you everyone at home for hitting the like button and subscribing, all that kind of business. And we will see you all very soon. All the best. Bye-bye.